In this video, I'm going to show you how you can manage a fixed bid project effectively so you don't come out on a loss. Hey everybody, my name is Don Felker, and in this channel I help you start, survive, and thrive in the world of independent consulting so you can live a life of financial freedom and autonomy, one that you've always dreamed of. Today we're going to talk about how you can manage a fixed bid project so you really don't lose your behind on it. Now, what is a fixed bid project? Now, I talked about the difference between a fixed bid project and an hourly project in this video here, so you can check that out. However, just as a quick recap, a fixed bid project is a project in which you have a fixed scope for usually a limited duration of time with a set of deliverables that are defined through a spec or something like that. Now, a spec is going to be a specification, and I'm going to use the example of developing a application, maybe a mobile application. A client wants you to build an application based upon their specification. They'll give you that specification. You can then provide your bid of how much you think it would cost. And if the client accepts you, well, then you go ahead and start working on the application and start delivering value as soon as possible. It's very rare in a software project to get a full, complete spec. And what is it? Let's go ahead and define what a specification is. The specification, and I've seen varying different specifications in the industry, could be from a simple one-page document that says here's what the application should do. It should have these 3 screens. When we click on this button, it should be able to scan a UPC code and send that UPC value to the server. And then it would even contain things like error conditions and so forth. However, in the software world, a lot of the times when people are looking for fixed bids is because they want to be able to limit the scope of how much they're spending on their project, which is a smart business decision overall. However, the problem with that is from a development perspective, we often don't know what the client wants because the specification is not that tight. A really good specification would contain user stories about how users are going to use the application, would contain mock-ups of the actual application, even high fidelity mock-ups, which are full graphic assets. They provide you with all of the resources that you need in the correct sizes, and you would basically be able to sit down and start coding the application and deliver it given everything that they have. And you really wouldn't have any questions because everything would be provided in the spec. Now, I have been at clients where the spec was very detailed, upwards 50, 60 pages long, where it contained everything that I needed, including PDFs, system documentation, integration documentation, and everything that I needed from top to bottom of how the application would work, even including error conditions. Now, if you don't have these things and you are asked to provide a bid on a project, it's really hard to give an accurate representation of how much something would cost. Let's use the software example again. If you were to given a specification that said we would like to have these screens and it needs to communicate with a server, that's fine. But what happens when there's a failure condition? What happens when there's no internet? What should happen on the application then? These are all things that need to be taken into consideration when you are developing your actual bid. And unfortunately, a lot of these things are missed. What's the error messaging? What happens when things fail? What should we do in these weird one-off edge case scenarios? All those things need to be considered. Now, unfortunately, a lot of times you're not going to know what you don't know yet. And so maybe you're accepted, and as you start working on the project, you realize there's nothing that states what I should do in this scenario or this scenario. And at that point, you need to introduce what's known as a change request once you identify what it is. So perhaps you contact the client, say, hey, what do we do in this scenario? I didn't see anything in the spec for it. And I say, oh, wow, we totally forgot that. Yes, good question. We need to do X, Y, and Z in that case. And by the way, that also needs to happen in these 10 other locations of the app. Well, now immediately what you need to do to manage this project properly is to implement a change request. And that change request would state, on all these screens, we need to do these specific things and given these certain conditions. And then what you would actually do is say, hey, given this additional work, it's going to add another X amount of dollars to the bid. Now, before you agree to implement that work, the client needs to agree and sign off on this change request. So it does require a significant amount of additional admin overhead. You have to be really good at tracking the actual project and what's going on inside of the project on a day-to-day basis. Because if anything were to change, even down to the smallest changes of, hey, we need to just remove this button, you need to keep track of everything, because as soon as it's one button, then it turns into 2 buttons, then it turns into, hey, can you just change this little text over here, and can you move this over here? You can approach this with your own level of risk analysis of how you'd like to handle each scenario. But however, you have to be careful, because unfortunately there are clients out there that are not too morally, ethically correct and will try to take advantage of you, unfortunately, and try to get you to do work for free. So you kind of have to make sure you put your foot down and say, hey, if we're going to make these changes, then it needs to go through a change request form. That's going to be the best way to handle that. Now, if you notice that you're implementing multiple change requests fairly frequently, it's best to sit down with the client and let them know, saying, hey, I noticed in the last week we've already had 5 or 6 change requests. I think it's best if we go through the application, the spec together, and let's see what else is missing. Let's take half of a day, go through the spec, see what it's missing, and if it's missing anything else based upon what we've learned, let's add that in there now, and we'll submit a large change request with all of the stuff in there so it doesn't feel like I'm nickel and diming you to death. Because as a client continually gets pushback, well, you want us to change that, it's going to be another 10 hours, it's going to be another 40 hours. If the client is not accustomed to that, they will feel sometimes that they are being nickel and dimed to death and will start to feel resentful towards the consultant that's doing the work for them. So you have to maintain that relationship, have the open level of communication with them and say, hey, I see what's going on here. I kind of see what's coming down the pipe. Let's try to head this off at the pass by having a meeting and kind of identify all of the changes that are going to happen. Now, this also goes for things that are being added, which is the majority of the time in software, but it also applies for when things need to be removed. Let's assume you've built the application. There's multiple screens in it, and you're told you need to move this screen from here to over here, or I need to just delete this screen, or remove half this screen, or take it and cut it in half and put half over here and half over there. All of those are changes. All of them require work. If it requires work that is not specified in the spec, it's something that needs to go through a change request. And then once the change request is approved by the client and you, then at that point, they can then be entered into the project. If you're using project management tool, you can enter it inside of there. I recommend that you keep track of all this inside of your own documentation tool outside of the client, or for your documentation purposes of all the change requests, not their actual IP outside of the client, but any of the change requests, so you have that documentation as well. And the reason for this is just to make sure that you're covered in case there's any type of legal problems down the future. If they decide that they don't want to pay you because they say that you've overcharged them, you can then use those documents in a court-based type scenario. Well, look, here's all the change requests. They agreed to these change requests. I implemented the work. They say that they're being charged too much, but they also agreed to it beforehand. So just keep track of all the documentation, have open communication with your client. Make sure that you're tracking all of the change requests and pushing them through and getting them approved before you start work, because after you start work, it's going to be hard to get them to approve the change requests after you've already started them. Now, that's going to be the best way at a real simple level to manage a fixed bid project as an independent consultant. If you're working on a team of consultants, which sometimes happens, you might have a project manager. For example, if you're a subcontractor at a consultancy that's at a client, which I have done, I might talk to the project manager there and they'll deal with the change management process. And I'm just billing as perhaps maybe a hourly person to the company that I'm subcontracting under, who has a fixed bid with the client. So you just want to make sure all communication is open and you're not just sitting there just kind of doing the work blindly. Have the communication open, make sure that everyone's on the same page, make sure that the agreements are there, and you should succeed in any type of fixed bid project. It's just going to take a significant amount of admin work than you're probably already used to. So document everything. Now, I hope this helps. If this kind of information is useful for you or you found some value in this video, please just do me a favor and hit the like button. That really helps me. And you can subscribe to the channel. I'll be talking about independent consulting topics and have various different types of different things we'll be going over to help you in your career, again, to start, survive, and thrive as an independent consultant. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.